Okay, guys, what we learnt from Collingwood, the Brisbane Lions, and the Gold Coast playing tonight in the preseason games. A pretty interesting concept and one that was a little bit, in some ways, hard to follow because you had, for example, Collingwood playing Brisbane at the beginning of the match and then Gold Coast come on and then they play a side that's already fatigued. So it's a little bit hard to get a gauge on what's happening. I think the first two games were sort of interesting as far as looking at the positions that different sort of players played in their representative sides, but after that, in that third game, it probably just got a little bit, I suppose, like Collingwood sort of played a fully second string team, played some of the veterans in that game. A little bit hard to follow, but I'll try to get through this as best I can. I think the first game was probably the most entertaining for me, just as a neutral fan, just, checking out two really good sides. I thought Brisbane were absolutely phenomenal in that first game against Collingwood. The way that they moved the ball off the back half was sort of breathtaking at times. They've just got so much venom and so much... there's so much anticipation when the ball goes inside 50 for the Brisbane Lions at the moment, and they move the footy so well. But just to focus on some of those forward players, Kai Lohmann, to think that he wasn't really even in the side at the beginning of last season, how dynamic he looks at the moment. He wins all of his forward 50 duels. He's really explosive off the mark, but he's also a dangerous overhead player. You've got Cam Rayner down there who seems to be looking even stronger aerially at the moment. And then there's players like, if you're talking about the key position players, there's players like Logan Morris who just looked absolutely fantastic in this game as a target game. And it doesn't look like, if he takes a few steps this season, it doesn't look like they'll be missing Danaher at all. They've obviously got Hipwood. I don't think he played in this game at all, Hipwood. So they'll have him to come back into the side. But it was... they weren't playing a fully strong Collingwood side. So when they did move the ball from the back half with ease, it probably wasn't as you would expect against a defensively minded Collingwood side that had all of their pieces there. But you didn't really see any of that sort of winning the ball back from Collingwood like you would have hoped, like a Darcy Moore sort of intercepting or anything like that. Brisbane pretty much were able to find their targets inside forward 50, and I think that was partly due to a lack of pressure up the field. But they did, Brisbane were absolutely fantastic in the game. And if you go to that midfield group, I think the way that their midfield got on top at the stoppages as well was really important, even though I mentioned how venomous they were off the back half. But I think they were better in the stoppages as well for most of it. You looked at, the Collingwood midfield, they were running Nick Dacos, Crisp and Perryman, who was the new player in there. Perryman probably had a fairly modest game. He's going to be in there as more that defensive player, and you'd have probably De Goey in there over Crisp, I imagine, in their round one side. So that'll be interesting how they kind of balance that up. But yeah, Dacos, De Goey, Perryman, I think they were sort of well beaten and they looked a little bit disorganised compared to the Brisbane midfield of Ashcroft, Lachie Neale and Josh Dunkley was the other one there as well. So they just looked really balanced and they were able to flick the ball from inside to out and kind of activate Dane Zorko off the half-back line from a lot of those stoppage. He came running through and just getting those 3-4 handballs and kind of putting the Collingwood midfielders sort of off step a little bit, just a little bit behind the play. And then they were able to get the ball inside 50 to those dangerous forward 50 contest winners. So my one big takeaway from this game is that Brisbane are going to be super dangerous again. And if we talk about the terrible start that they had to the season last year and then how they finished the season, I think we're going to be seeing more of that back half of the year. Those small forwards just look scary and they've got players like Harris Andrews behind the ball. Darcy Wilmot was pretty good in this game as well. So exciting times. As far as some of the, other players that we have to talk about, I think Ed Allen from the Pies needs to have a discussion. He played a little bit through that centre bounce group as well. Came in as kind of like the fourth mid, I suppose. Probably just struggled a little bit on the ball, I thought. His contest work is pretty good, but sometimes he was kind of opened up into space from some of his teammates and he just missed the kick and just looked like he lacked a little bit of polish. So it's difficult, I think, with the amount of players that Collingwood have to run through that midfield group. It's probably hard to justify playing him as a winger just in itself. So he's an interesting one for the round one side. I think Schultz and Elliott for the Pies started to really come into the game, particularly Schultz sort of towards the end of that second quarter. He started to play really well, just get on the move and kind of looked a little bit like some of those Brisbane forwards that I mentioned. He was winning some of those forward 50 contests and just seemed to be opening up space and drifting into those pockets like a good half forward does and coming up to stoppage. Jamie Elliott had some really dynamic moments without being kind of, super dangerous throughout the entire game. I mentioned Lohman. I mentioned Archie as well. He was really good. Logan Morris. And then Charlie Cameron sort of operated as that deep small forward for Brisbane. So they were the main ones. And then you had game 2. So Brisbane stayed on the park and then they were up against the Gold Coast Suns, which, again, interesting. I think the dynamism really sort of dropped out of Brisbane in that second game. They made a few changes. They brought on players like Levi Ashcroft, like Sam Marshall as well, who both had really good debuts. I think Levi Ashcroft was busy and just picked up his ball. He got to a lot of centre bounces there. I think the question around Levi Ashcroft is he going to break into this best 22? Because it's difficult to see who he replaces. I mean, the obvious one for me, sort of coming into this preseason, I thought he might sort of surpass someone like a Jasper Fletcher, but he looked really good in these games as well and looks like he's maybe taken an extra step on the wing. And you've got a player like Berry there who's kind of already occupying that wing position. Could he get in as a half forward? I just sort of failed to see who he replaces unless there's an injury to a key player. So that's an interesting watch, but an awesome debut for Levi. Had a few colourful moments throughout the game as well. Sam Marshall, he came on a little bit later and kicked the goal with his first kicking footy, so that was pretty awesome for him, but probably didn't get into the game as much and didn't get the opportunity of a Levi Ashcroft. But Brisbane, just in general, sort of I mentioned that the dynamism sort of went out of them. They just kind of lost that run off the half-back line. I think Gold Coast were playing a much stronger side than what Collingwood were. You look at that midfield group, it was pretty much Rao, Anderson. They had Graham going through there as well as that sort of defensive mid at times, but then they would run someone like a Bailey Humphrey through there. And I think watching him in this game, he looks like one of those players that does look ready to sort of explode in the 2025 season. Whether he plays enough midfield time to sort of get big numbers of a sort of forward half midfielder, but definitely looks like he's taken a step. He's got a little bit more power there, laid some big bone-crunching tackles, and he's kicking the ball sort of 50 to 60 metres with pretty much ease. So I think he can be at least dangerous inside forward 50 for Gold Coast, and they really do need that player. They've got the key position forwards down there that we'll talk about in a second, but they probably need that ground level presence as well and that sort of powerful forward of centre player. If he can step in and play some midfield minutes, I think that'll be really important as well. I mean, the players that were missing for Gold Coast, you probably had mainly Tuke Miller and Dan Rioli, just off the top of my head there, but John Noble slotted in across half back. It'll be interesting to see how that sort of works. Does John Noble even make the best 22 at the end of the day when you've got players back there like Hewland? And we know the key position stocks are really full with players like Collins and Ballard and Mac Andrews back there as well. So there's a lot of players to go into that back line. Of course, I said Dan Rioli is going to come back and really strengthen and increase that ball movement as well. Looking forward for the Gold Coast Suns, Jed Walter, I think he was really impressive and looks like he's come of age. Looks to be a target down there for them. Ethan Reid kicked a couple of goals in the second match later on. But they were both really, really good. And players like Leo Lombard and Jake Rogers, they kind of got to show their stuff. I'm hoping that there's no serious damage there to Leo Lombard, who laid a bit of a hit on Levi Ashcroft and came off second best in that one. So was nursing a shoulder injury, so we'll have to wait on the prognosis of that one. But he looked really dynamic, and just to sort of watch him, how he moved out there, very cat-like and very dangerous inside that forward 50. Rogers did the same, but he sort of floated into the midfield a little bit more, I guess just having that extra season under his belt. And then you had game 3, which I sort of mentioned. This one I was paying less attention to be honest. I lost a little bit of interest in it. It was sort of big sweeping changes, particularly to the Collingwood side. Scott Pendlebury, still side bottom came in, Mychek came in. So I'd much rather see all of those players gel together. I did forget to mention in the first video too with Collingwood, Will Hayes, who debuted in this game. I thought he was really good. You could see some of the outside work that he does, the running ability to create an overload on the opposition. So he was really good. And the other one was Membry, who played his first game for Collingwood as well. He was probably unsighted and a little bit underwhelming based on what I've heard from his track watch this preseason. And then those other ones that I mentioned that came into the second game. So this is a little bit convoluted to break down because you had different players coming on at different times. Of course, then Collingwood come back, they're a little bit more fresh, and Gold Coast are probably tiring. So an interesting experiment. One where I probably look at these games a little bit more from what teams do in the first half that they play, because they tend to play closer to their sort of A side. Some of those B side players definitely have the opportunity to step up and play in that side. You know, you look at Levi Ashcroft, he's definitely in the mix. For Collingwood, it's a little bit different because they're sort of they're managing players that have been in the system for a long time, like Pendles and Sidebottom and Mycheck. So that's more of a management thing, I would say. And then some teams are playing younger players as well. So it's tricky, but that was my takeaways from the game, and it'll be really interesting. As I've kind of said along this preseason, I'm going to be making videos on best 23s as well throughout, so they'll be kind of changing as we get new information. Apart from that, guys, I'll leave it with you. I'll be trying to get videos, these reaction videos out for all of the preseason matches, and I'll see you guys next time.